Well, you're looking at a fireball log. This is fireballs that break the sound barrier. Upper left-hand corner, you see how many fireballs were in the first 4 months or the first quarter of this year. Multiply that by 3, you'll get an annual average that's roughly the same as last year and the year before. So we have peaked out at about 540, 550 fireballs that break the sound barrier per year, when we used to have 0. And now, but they're larger, by the way, and we know they're larger for more than one reason, is that the number of people reporting is going up, and the number of states or provinces seeing the same object, though the number of people seeing them goes through the ceiling. You have hundreds of people that witness this thing, and the number of multi-state reports goes up, but the total number doesn't. That means you're probably seeing some larger objects now. But the densities, they really seem nice and consistent. And I would love to see a gravitational model of how these densities appear. It could be like an ocean of stuff just floating around, and we travel through it. But some people are expressing concern because there's so many NEOs, and I mean, it's incredible what they've done, and it's like the new normal now is thousands of NEOs. But the database was huge, and thousands of NEOs, and even ones that are doubled or coupled together, multiple objects that are being tracked that are close to one another, like a fragmented asteroid. Those numbers are going up. And when you have something traveling in a tight cluster, usually they haven't been traveling for thousands of years, because there's a slight variation in their orbits, and over time they grow further and further apart and become more scattered and strewn. But the NEOs, I don't know what to make of it. And I went to the original database, and these people are just copy and pasting a database, and I'm trying to get, well, the lunar, we're talking about perihelion, lunar distance, and solar distance. AU is solar distance. So how far is this object going to be from the sun, from us, and how far from the moon? So when the object reaches perihelion, the lunar distances and the solar distances should be vastly different. I mean, by decimal points. And we're not seeing that in this column, and it's been like that for 3 or 4 years, and I just kind of threw my hands up and quit going to RSOE because of, I just don't know what to make. And are those, I mean, if those are lunar distances, some of these objects are whizzing by 1/10 the distance from Earth to the moon. The fireball situation we were concerned about because these can bring on ice ages. However, when we saw what the sun was doing, and we actually got confirmation that we weren't just imagining a whiter, hotter sun, and we were just looking at the symptoms all around. Oceanic surface temperatures are a great measure of solar energy. What heats your ground? The carbon dioxide? So it's really we became more concerned about the sun than we did about asteroids. In fact, we kind of hoped we'd have an impact somewhere so that we could block out some of the solar radiation, and then they could park all those planes that are spraying that white stuff in the sky, that stretch from horizon to horizon and crisscross and gradually fade into this haze that kind of blocks out the sun. But the sun is still blinding, but not as it was during the end of solar max. And when we start getting sunspots, we're going to see a sharp increase in that radiation again. It's going to go up. And that's more of a concern to me because it affects my health just on a daily basis and has been, and your health too. You know, people say, oh, it doesn't bother me. Well, you went to bed an hour early. You didn't eat as much. You seem to be drinking a lot of water. You're a little moody. You know, people don't think it affects them. Oh, you made a stupid mistake at work today. So it's really not just the cardiac arrhythmias that we're concerned about. It's the neurological effects too of the radiation. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about this topic because it's so much more interesting than the coronavirus. And we're seeing larger asteroids now, or larger meteors, and there's even a meteor season, fireball season. They called it February, the fireball season. And it wasn't just February, it was January and March, but they peaked in February. So if the sun's pulling something in from the opposite side of the sun and slinging them downstream, that focusing cone downstream is where Earth has to pass through. So then we get these huge green meteors that come from the asteroid belt. Well, what are so many of them doing here now? You know, and the only obvious situation that would explain that is that obviously a large object brought them here, slung them here. Now, when this thing, the brown dwarf, passed by Earth and made its perihelion approach to Earth, the only thing that happened is the sun brightened again. Our magnetosphere went nuts. And not the magnetosphere simulations, but our magnetic north shifted in an unprecedented movement. Incredibly unprecedented movement. And so we theorized that, well, now the debris streams, we got to deal with the debris stream and the stuff that follows the debris tail that this thing is famous for, Planet X. Now, just for people out there who are turned off by the notion of the name Planet X and it's a conspiracy theory, it is not a conspiracy theory. It's reported on and documented by NASA. The name came from astronomers. They talked about searching for it. They even wrote articles about the location. Some of the biggest astronomers on the planet. Okay? You ever heard of Percival Lowell? Ever heard of Robert Harrington, Chief of Naval Astronomy? You know, a lot of these people use that term. But then it became Nemesis. And now it's Planet 9. So, whatever you want to call it, if it came through the solar system, it would do certain things that were predictable and that would have to happen. You just can't rewrite the laws of physics. And although it sure seems like the powers that be would like to. And so the asteroids, the near-Earth objects, that database is so huge you can't keep track of it anymore. But what bothers me on RSOE this database that they pulled it from is that the lunar distances and the astronomical units are too close together. There's just no way. There's no way that they could be. So it's almost as if there's somebody's posting the lunar distances or just the AUs and putting them in the lunar distance. It really looks like somebody's grabbing a wrong column of numbers and putting them in lunar distance or putting them in the AU distance. Now, the lunar distances, if those are correct, some of those distances would be concerning if you're concerned about impacts. 1/10 of the distance from the Earth to the Moon is pretty darn close. It's still far away, though, if you're traveling extremely fast, and especially in opposite directions. And where we see most of the captures happening, we see most of the captures happening when the the angle is directly in front of the Earth and this thing passes right in front of the Earth, or it's traveling in the same direction as Earth and is able to maintain contact with our magnetic field and our gravitational field longer to be effective. But the sharp increase in fireballs that break the sound barrier has peaked. It's large objects, big objects are breaking the sound barrier. Our atmosphere is doing an absolute superb job in shielding Earth. But if one were to hit the ground, you would say, we have to put particulates in the air, and I would sure like those jets to quit spraying whatever it is they're spraying. It's white, fluffy, and covers the entire sky sometimes. The softening of the tectonic plates of those magnitudes has been noticed in the last 2 or 3 alignments, but we still see our volcanic chambers, our volcanic zones active. This is Mono Lake. This is a week or two after they had a huge cluster, and they're still clustering in the same area. Most of these are between 3 and 9 kilometers deep, and this is no doubt, you can tell, Mono Lake looks like a crater. Mono Lake, that thumb in the middle, that's a resurgent lava dome. So Mono Valley probably is fed by the same magma chamber that fed Long Valley. Now Long Valley is just south. You can see some earthquakes there, and where it says Mammoth. The western edge of the caldera is poorly defined because of the plateau and mountain building done by the magma flows. A massive magma flow created the Sierra Nevadas, which are almost all volcanic. But if you can almost trace a complete sphere, and it's just a little bit larger than the Mono Valley, not just Mono Lake, but Mono Valley itself, and the water congregates at the lowest point of your caldera. So, those are like Yellowstone and Island Park. They're next door. That's the same magma. It's the same feeder tubes. It's just through plate tectonics, the surface is not where it used to be. So when this stuff intrudes and explodes, it doesn't keep exploding in the same super caldera. So that's pretty interesting. That Mono Valley is more active than Mammoth Mountain, and sorry for the way this is cropped, but this is Nevada, California, and you can see that all along the rim of the Great Basin you can see increased volcanism. Right there, slightly to the lower left, you see a cluster. That's that ridge crest zone. That's along a fault line, but it's also in a subsidence zone too. And don't think that cracks in the ground can't be created by subsidence. Not all faults are tectonic faults. A lot of it is subsidence, and where one layer is at a different altitude or elevation than the second layer. Something went down or something went up. I'm voting on down, subsidence. Los Angeles, you can see that area. You almost can't even see Los Angeles with all the earthquakes that are happening inland from Los Angeles, and all over the Southern California, we're seeing clusters at the bottom of the screen. That's near Palm Valley, and San Bernardino is just a smattering of an increase in seismicity. Near the Santa Rosa Mountains, this is that cluster. Again, most of these are between 3 and 7, 9 kilometers. So a lot of activity. And Salt Lake City is, the Great Salt Lake is the bottom of a caldera. It's part of the Great Basin. The Antelope Island is a basalt ridge right in the middle of that lake, and all around the Great Salt Lake, there is nothing but volcanic mountains, magma flows, basalt flows. So that's still active. And no, I don't think they blew up a bunker down there. I could be wrong. And the reason I say that is because of the pattern of these quakes and all the aftershocks. And Utah has becoming gradually more and more seismic over the last 5 years, as has Nevada and a lot of other places. But then you go into Montana, Idaho, and you're like, what the heck's going on in Idaho? And notice how these follow a river basin. And so what happens when you have a caldera, but you have these huge magma flows, water tends to flow towards your calderas. But then we go to Yellowstone itself, and they were like, yawn, yawn. There's nothing going on there. And remember, when people were talking about how Yellowstone was going to erupt, remember that. Those days with uplift, uplift, uplift. I wasn't calling foul until we were seeing clusters of quakes that were shallower than 2 kilometers. So we weren't seeing the quake signatures that would precede even a minor eruption. So we passed an alignment. The softening of the tectonics is specifically due to the position of the brown dwarf. It's very high. So in conclusion, the fireball totals, especially the ones that create sonic booms, and at their highest level ever, and the size is increasing, and we could tell by how many states these things traverse and how many people actually see a fireball. The NEO situation is bizarre. It's overwhelming. We just had a dozen or more pass by today. NEOs all on an NEO list came whizzing by today. And the orbital diagrams on NASA's orbital diagrams of these NEOs, my antivirus alerts me not to go on there. The numbers being reported are confusing. I mean, 0.04 lunar distance is as close as you want anything to come. I think that's about as close as DA 14 came. But that, I'm just going by a really distant and failing memory now. But so 0.04 is not collision distance. You're going to have to come a little closer. The only way 0.04 lunar distance is going to create a collision is if it's traveling roughly in the same direction and like a docking pattern, or if it directly crosses in front of us. So that's about the only way you're going to get hit by these asteroids, because they're traveling so fast, 25 kilometers a second. They're carrying a lot of momentum. So if they're iron, Earth's magnetic field will create a stronger attraction. So if you have, let's say, DA 2014 wasn't an iron asteroid, but something that comes just as close in a similar pattern was an iron asteroid, the chances of capturing that object would be greater. But I'm not anticipating an impact, at least not an asteroid impact. And with respect to the earthquakes, we know the tectonics are softening. The magnitudes are going down on these big, large body alignments. And we know that the pattern has played out now 3 times on 3 alignments. We saw earthquakes. We even saw a couple big earthquakes. We just weren't seeing the string of earthquakes that we're used to seeing. And that has to do with relative position and speed of that object, which is like a second magnet. The solar radiance has gone down a little. The planets are still bright, but not as bright as they were during the end of solar max. And the radiation has dipped down a little bit.